I wasn't supposed to find this. The county records office had been closing in 30 minutes, and I was only there chasing a reference, something small, a date for an unrelated project. The air was thick, faintly metallic, and the overhead lights hummed as if they'd been burning since the 70s. I wandered too far down the microfilm aisle and into the basement staircase, where the air shifted, damp, swollen with rot and mildew. The kind of air that sticks to your clothes, makes you taste rust on the back of your tongue. The basement wasn't listed on any map. A steel door stood ajar, hinges warped as if forced decades ago and left that way. Beyond it, silence, heavy and total, like a lung waiting to exhale. My flashlight beam caught dust motes spiraling like ash in church light. That's when I saw the ledger. It sat on a collapsed cabinet, spine split, the cover bloated with water damage. The pages had been glued together by humidity, peeling like dead skin when I tried to separate them. Inside, rows of neat names, each penned in a spidery, careful hand. The earliest date, 1947. The latest, 1984. One name kept repeating, almost methodically, every few pages, Velma Barfield. I knew the name, though I couldn't place it at first. It pressed against memory like a word on the tip of the tongue. And beside her entries, always the same annotation, written in faded blue ink, disposition secured. No explanation, no context. Just that phrase. The deeper I went, the stranger it became. Some pages were blacked out with thick strokes of ink, entire columns erased to absence. Others carried numbers scrawled in the margins, July 4th, 19 or 118-118-118, repeated with obsessive exactness. One page bore a symbol etched directly into the paper, carved so deep the blade had sliced through 3 layers. A crude cross, inverted, but distorted as though it had been sketched by a trembling hand. I wanted to stop, but I couldn't. There's a gravity to certain discoveries, a pull that feels older than reason. Near the ledger's end, a loose sheet slipped free, typed on a mechanical ribbon, the letters sharp and final, case #47, B subject, V. Barfield recommendation, custodial integration. No external disclosure. Status, active compliance confirmed. I read it 3 times before the words arranged themselves into something coherent. Custodial integration. Active compliance. This wasn't just a ledger, it was a record of something hidden, something orchestrated. That's when I noticed the silence again. The room had no echoes. My footsteps, my breathing, even the shuffle of the pages, all of it was absorbed, swallowed. As though the space itself had been designed to keep secrets. And under the ledger, half buried in plaster dust, I found something else. A tin badge, corroded and bent. The lettering was barely legible, but I could still make it out, Dorton State Hospital. The hospital had been demolished decades ago, condemned after a fire no one seemed eager to explain. I remember watching from the back seat of my father's car as smoke curled into the Carolina sky, and the adults whispering that it was better that way. Velma's name appeared 12 more times in that ledger. Every entry paired with others, patients, witnesses, orderlies, even county officials, crossed out, as if consumed by her orbit. My stomach turned, a cold nausea threading into my bones. Whoever kept this ledger didn't just know about her. They were keeping her. Shielding her. I should have closed the book. I should have left the basement and never returned. But the last page changed everything. At the bottom, faintly penciled in, doctrine intact. That was enough. I had to know what it meant. When I left the courthouse basement, I carried the ledger's fragments in a sealed envelope, though I felt as though I had smuggled out something alive. The badge, Dorton State Hospital, became my compass. Official histories of Dorton were brief, almost perfunctory. Built in 1924, expanded during the Depression, it was one of North Carolina's many custodial institutions designed to house the mentally ill and the chronically infirm. It claimed to offer Christian care and medical discipline. It burned in 1984 under uncertain electrical causes. No survivors were listed in the report. But Dorton's absence felt staged. Newspaper archives spoke of its annual charity galas, fundraisers backed by local banks, and visits from state officials who praised its commitment to moral rehabilitation. Then the trail thinned. By the 1970s, it was almost as if no one left Dorton. The state archives yielded more. After 2 days of sifting through requisition forms and payroll slips, I found a brittle personnel file. Dorton was overseen by a man named Dr. Lawrence R. Keene. His name appeared in the Carolina Medical Journal throughout the 1930s, speeches on applied moral medicine and reform through obedience. Photographs showed a tall man with a hawk-like face and wire-rimmed glasses, a hand perpetually gripping the shoulder of some frail child or pale nurse. The captions called him Superintendent Keene. Keene's language was polished, righteous, almost priestly. In a keynote to the Raleigh Medical Association in 1939, he declared, "We cannot allow the afflicted to wander in the wilderness of their own defects. It is our duty to bind them, to root them into the soil of discipline, so that they may never stray. Freedom is suffering. Control is mercy." It sounded less like medicine than theology. I tracked down Dorton's annual reports, stored on microfilm. They were a facade of numbers, patient intakes, expenditures, occasional photographs of smiling nurses spoon-feeding elderly women. But I noticed something else. Patient admission numbers climbed steadily, year after year. Yet discharges never matched. Dorton was always full. Overflowing. No records of release. No records of burial. Just intake after intake. The ledger I found in the courthouse matched those years precisely. Velma's name appeared in Dorton's admissions in 1978, classified as a family-sent patient. I found no corresponding discharge. But according to public record, she was arrested in 1978, convicted of poisoning her fiancé. How could she have been both? That contradiction gnawed at me. I made calls. Most lines led to dead ends, disconnected numbers, or relatives who refused to speak. But one retired orderly agreed to meet me, anonymously, in a diner off I-95. He was in his 80s, trembling as he stirred his coffee. When I asked about Dorton, his eyes glassed over as if replaying something. "They didn't leave," he whispered. "No one left. Not the sick, not the staff. Keene said once you entered, you were part of the doctrine." That was the word he used. Doctrine. He would not elaborate further. When I pressed about Velma, he gripped my wrist with startling force. "She wasn't a patient," he hissed. "She was a vessel." He slid out of the booth and was gone before I could stop him. Back at home, I opened the envelope again. The ledger's last page with its faint penciled words, "Doctrine intact." Now I understood. Dorton hadn't burned down. It had been erased. And the doctrine, whatever it was, survived. The further I dug into Dorton, the more it became clear that the true horror wasn't simply confinement. It was disappearance. At first, it was subtle. Names blurred in reports, patient numbers substituted where families should have been. In one ledger entry, a woman was listed as Margaret H., age 22. The following year's census recorded her only as MH, compliant. By the next, she was simply Unit 14. The archives coughed up letters, supposedly written by patients to relatives. But they were all eerily similar, as though dictated. "I am well cared for. I pray every day. The staff are kind. Do not worry. I am safe." The handwriting differed, but the phrasing never did. Lines copied like scripture, emptied of voice. One letter in particular froze me. It was signed Velma. Not Velma Barfield, just Velma, no surname, as though she no longer belonged to anyone. The date, 1979, a year she was publicly in prison. The contradiction deepened. Was she in two places at once, or had Dorton claimed her entirely? In the hospital's rubble, a burned wing photographed before demolition, names had been carved into the foundation stones. Rows of them, gouged into concrete by desperate hands. But almost every name had been crossed out, furiously scored until they were illegible. As though erasure had become the only way to survive. Through an old church registry, I traced a woman who had once worked in Dorton's laundry. Her niece, Ruth, met me in a faded clapboard house near Fayetteville. She remembered her aunt returning home for one Christmas in 1962. She was quiet, Ruth said, twisting a ring around her finger. Not like herself. She forgot the names of her own brothers. She kept calling everyone by numbers. And she told us not to call her Mary anymore. She said her name was Six. Just Six. Her voice broke when she added, "We never saw her again after that." I couldn't shake that image, a woman stripped down to a digit, wearing it like a brand. Among the files, I also found photographs. Class-style portraits, rows of patients seated stiffly in chairs. At first glance, they seemed ordinary. But then I noticed, the faces were eerily uniform. Not identical, but expressionless, emptied of personality. Smiles frozen, hair combed in the same part. And the captions below each print didn't carry names. Only phrases like doctrinal success, Group A. The more I read, the more I felt my own grip loosening. My notes blurred together. The same sentences repeated themselves. When I woke one morning, I found I had scrawled a phrase in my notebook during sleep: I am well cared for. I am safe. The doctrine wasn't content to erase its subjects. It rewrote them. And then I met James Harper. He was the son of a former orderly, and he showed me a journal his father had hidden. The entries began coherently, lists of duties, mentions of Dr. Keene's sermons. But over weeks, the sentences decayed. Day 14, assigned to Ward C, patients refusing food. Velma sings to them at night. Day 22, my name is James Harper. Day 23, my name is James Harper. Day 24, my name is. By the last entry, the handwriting had devolved into frantic scratches, repeating only, my name, my name, my name. James closed the journal with shaking hands. He was alive when he left Dorton, he said. But he wasn't my father anymore. I left Ruth's house sick with dread. Dorton hadn't just swallowed bodies. It devoured memory itself. And as I drove home, I realized I had been whispering under my breath, without meaning to, I am safe. I am safe. I am safe. I had to see what remained of Dorton for myself. The hospital's ruins lay outside Red Springs, a fenced-off lot claimed by weeds and vines, the brick husk blackened by fire. The main hall was gutted, the roof collapsed, windows blind with soot. Locals swore it was unsafe, that the ground itself had shifted since the blaze. But when I stepped through a breach in the wall, the air carried not ash but something sweeter, chloroform, or perhaps opium, faintly clinging to the stone. The upper levels were ruin. But beneath them, the hospital's spine still pulsed. A stairwell led down into earth, farther than any state hospital should have required. I counted 4 flights, then lost track. The geometry twisted, steps curving back into themselves. When I turned to climb back up, I found myself descending instead, as though the building had reversed my direction. Finally, the stairs expelled me into a corridor that shouldn't have existed, a series of rooms carved into the foundation. Walls damp with condensation, ceilings dripping. One chamber had been a morgue, but the drawers were too small, as if built for children. Another was lined with padded cells, the stuffing torn, smelling of mildew and iron. In the deepest chamber, I found journals, stacked neatly in crates that had somehow escaped the fire. Their covers bore the seal of Dorton, though some had been warped by water. Inside were photographs, grainy black and white images of patients bound to chairs, blindfolded, mouths clamped open by metal devices. Beneath each photo, silence therapy. One journal described weekly sessions of stilling. Patients submerged in sensory tanks, left in total dark and silence until they forgot their origins. The language was clinical, but the margins told another story. Notes scrawled in frantic hand, whispers at the edges, they do not come back the same, they dream with open eyes. In another entry, Dr. Keene himself had written, the silence does not hold. They hum. They repeat names not their own. One, the Barfield woman, sang hymns none of us had taught her. Afterward, her cell bled along the walls as though the plaster remembered. I traced that entry with my finger, unsettled by the specificity. That's when I noticed the walls themselves. Hairline cracks bled rust-colored streaks that thickened as I stared, until I realized it wasn't rust at all. The stone wept dark, arterial lines, threading toward the floor. I touched one with my sleeve, wet, warm, undeniable. Then my flashlight beam caught something impossible. A mirror leaned against the far wall, frame splintered but intact. My reflection wavered in it, blurred as though underwater. But the mouth of the figure inside moved independently, shaping words I could not hear. When I leaned closer, the whisper emerged, my own voice, but distant, saying over and over, you were already here. The beam faltered, and in that flicker, I saw others in the glass. Rows of patients behind me, their heads bowed, lips moving in synchronization with mine. When I spun around, the chamber was empty. I forced myself to snap a photo, though the image burned my eyes, the mirror showed me standing in a crowd. I stumbled back up the stairwell, though the path bent and stretched like a corridor in a dream. When I emerged into daylight, I was drenched in sweat, lungs filled with the taste of iron. My camera still hung at my side, heavier than before. And when I checked the photos later, every single frame was black. Except one. The mirror. And in that reflection, I wasn't alone. I once believed Dorton was a singular wound, a place where cruelty had metastasized into ritual. But the ledger was never a local record. It was a map. When I returned to the courthouse basement, I noticed something I had overlooked in my panic the first time, faint penciled initials at the corner of certain pages, CB, GW, FH. The handwriting was different from Keene's, more hurried, as though left for someone who already knew the code. I laid the ledger against a county survey map. The initials matched locations. CB for Camp Bennett School for Girls, GW for Greystone Workhouse, FH for Faulkner Home for Orphans. Institutions scattered across the Carolinas and Virginia, each established in the same decades as Dorton, each quietly closed after fires, floods, or sudden bankruptcies. Their annual reports, where they still existed, shared identical mottos, discipline is mercy. The symbols repeated too. On Dorton's basement walls, I had traced that warped inverted cross. In the surviving charter of Faulkner Home, the same symbol appeared at the bottom, embossed faintly into the paper. Greystone's seal bore it as well, hidden in the filigree of the border. Different institutions, different facades, but all answering to the same hand. The registry came next. Tucked inside a box of state receipts, a bound sheaf titled simply The Doctrine, Census. Inside were lists, hundreds of names, organized by institution. Patients, staff, even county commissioners. Each name accompanied by a fate, secured. Integrated. Obedient. But there was something more unsettling. On the final page, in crisp typewriter ink, a note, 1984, transition completed. Remaining branches absorbed. The Daughters of Silence now in full stewardship. The phrase gripped me like a fever. The Daughters of Silence. A group I had never heard spoken of, yet their fingerprints stained every archive. They weren't content with hospitals. They absorbed schools, workhouses, orphanages, entire generations sculpted, erased, replaced. And then came the part that made me nearly drop the pages. My own surname was there. Halloway, J., intake secured, 1952. That was my grandfather. A man I had only known through photographs and faint stories of nervous troubles. Family lore said he had spent a short time in a clinic before returning home, taciturn and detached. But this record didn't say released. It said secured. I stared until the letters seemed to crawl on the page. Was he part of this? Or had he been taken, reformed, poured back into our family as something obedient? The journal of James Harper's father came back to me, my name, my name, my name. It wasn't just Velma. It wasn't just Dorton. The doctrine had been pruning the tree of America itself, institution by institution, family by family. I traced the network further. Each site collapsed in the same decade, the early 1980s, as though erased in unison. All official causes were mundane: electrical fires, gas leaks, accounting fraud. But in every case, the reports ended with the same phrase, always in a different hand, scrawled in the margins: doctrine intact. As though the destruction had been planned. As though each institution shed its skin and moved on. The deeper horror was realizing it never ended. When I checked modern nursing home contracts, private school charters, even halfway house mission statements, the language echoed Keene's sermons: obedience as freedom, silence as healing. The doctrine still breathes. And it has not forgotten the names it secured. The evidence covered my desk like a ritual in progress: ledgers, photographs, microfilm printouts, journals stacked in careful disorder. The doctrine's shadow reached across decades, states, families, including my own. I had enough to ruin reputations, to fracture entire genealogies, to expose what had been carefully buried for nearly a century. But at what cost? As I wrestled with the choice, I returned to Ruth's house. She had called me back, saying she had something her aunt left behind. She led me to a trunk in the attic, smelling of cedar and mold. Inside lay a reel-to-reel tape recorder, its reels still intact. With shaking hands, she pressed play. The voice that crackled through the speaker was a child's, thin, trembling, reciting as though forced. My name is Margaret. My name is Margaret. My name is, a pause, a click of static. My name is Unit 14. I am safe. I am cared for. I am obedient. The voice dissolved into sobbing, then silence. Ruth gripped my hand, her knuckles white. Tell me, she whispered, will it matter if I get out? Or will they just forget me again? Her question hollowed me. I had no answer. That night, I dreamt of Dorton's basement. The mirror. The crowd behind me. But this time, one child stepped forward, a boy with sunken eyes and a hospital gown too large for his frame. His lips moved without sound, then his voice broke through, remember me. When I woke, my room reeked faintly of chloroform. The doctrine wanted silence. It always had. But the children wanted names. I drove back to the courthouse basement one final time. The ledger waited where I'd hidden it. As I lifted it, another page slipped free, tucked deep in the spine. Typed in faded ink, it read, the doctrine is not destroyed by fire, nor by stone. It is undone only by memory. To speak is rebellion. To forget is loyalty. The words cut through me. Expose the doctrine, and families would be devastated, thousands of descendants forced to reckon with the fact that their loved ones were erased, replaced, or complicit. Bury it, and the system would continue, invisible, unchallenged. The impossible choice lay bare. I gathered every document, every photograph, every tape. I drove them to Dorton's ruins, now shrouded in fog. In the collapsed chapel, I built a pyre from rotted pews and lit the flame. One by one, I fed the records into the fire, journals curled, photographs blistered, tapes melted into black resin. The smoke rose thick, acrid, clinging to my lungs like confession. But I kept one thing. On the cracked stone altar, I left a single candle, stolen from Ruth's trunk. I lit it and stepped back. The flame bent against no wind, steady, defiant. In its glow, I thought I saw them, the forgotten children, the staff who lost their names, even Velma herself, watching, waiting. I whispered their names as best I could remember. Each one a rebellion. I could not expose the doctrine. Not yet. The world would not bear it. But I could refuse silence. The candle burned as I turned to leave, its light flickering against the blackened walls, illuminating the words scratched into the stone by countless hands, my name. My name. My name. And for the first time, I understood. To remember was the only act of defiance left. The official report came quickly. Cause of damage, structural collapse from years of weather erosion. No evidence of criminal activity. Site deemed hazardous and cleared of remaining debris. Another fire explained away. Another institution erased by convenient language. In the county paper, Dorton was remembered as a tragedy of neglect, a relic of poor construction and forgotten oversight. No mention of Keene, of ledgers, of doctrine. Just dust and condemnation. The state archivists arrived within a week. They catalogued what was left, filed reports in duplicate, and carted away boxes of charred paper. Nothing of significance recovered, one line read. No patient record survived. But I had seen the records. I had burned them myself. The doctrine had always worked this way, not with spectacle, but with omission. Names misplaced in ledgers. Bones misfiled as indeterminate remains. Families told their loved ones had died of complications. By the time anyone asked, the truth had already dissolved into clerical error. The ruins of Dorton were bulldozed, the ground seeded with grass, a chain-link fence raised to keep children from playing there. By spring, it looked less like a hospital and more like a meadow, sunlight glinting on broken glass half buried in soil. But some things resisted burial. In the rubble of the chapel, I found it, half hidden beneath charred wood, the wax still melted against the stone. The candle I had left still stood, extinguished but intact, as though no hand dared remove it. Beside it lay something I had not placed there, a small child's sketch, blackened at the edges but legible still. Crayon on scrap paper. A house, drawn square and crooked. A figure with no face standing at the door. Above it, in faint pencil, Unit 14. I took the drawing home, pressed it flat between glass. Some nights I dream of it glowing, as if lit from within. The county records now say Dorton's existence ended in 1984, closed by fire, and again in 2024, erased by collapse. Two endings, both official, both lies. But the doctrine has no ending. Its ashes seep into the ground, its whispers echo through misfiled names, its symbols creep into the margins of charters and contracts. I've begun to notice the language elsewhere, pamphlets for rehabilitation centers, sermons on obedience, school mottos engraved on cornerstones. Discipline is mercy. It resurfaces like mold through paint. Some nights, I still hear the tape in my dreams. The child's voice, repeating until it breaks, my name is Margaret. My name is Unit 14. And then softer, will it matter if I get out? The answer gnaws at me. I wasn't supposed to find this. I wasn't supposed to follow the threads, or hear the voices, or burn the proof. But I did. And in doing so, I inherited their memory. The ledger is gone. The photographs, the journals, all ash. Yet the doctrine survives, not in archives but in silence. That is the real cover-up, not that records burn, but that names fade from mouths, stories dim from memory. Still, I have kept the drawing. One scrap against oblivion. One voice against the doctrine. And when I walk past the meadow that used to be Dorton, I see the grass move strangely, as if many feet are still pacing below. I whisper the only words that feel true, my name. My name. My name. And in the silence afterward, something whispers back. 1.